In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, the Apostle Paul is stoned and left for dead. Did he then describe a near-death experience?
I think we actually have an example of a near-death experience in 2 Corinthians 12 when Paul went to the third heaven. Many people think that that experience occurred during a second missionary journey outside the city of Lystra when he was stoned and left for dead. And at the beginning of that experience he said, "I was in the body or out of the body, I don't know, God knows." And he said that twice. That's very characteristic of the way people feel when they're having a near-death experience and feeling as if they're out of their physical body. Paul, after that, went to the third heaven and saw revelations that he said no man is able to adequately describe when they come back.
But are these experiences reserved only for the ancient prophets? Daniel Brinkley's life was changed in a flash when a lightning strike sent him into cardiac arrest. In a moment, he was gone. But the greatest journey of his life had just begun. Daniel Brinkley is alive today, but what happened? Was he, like Paul, escorted into heaven? What is the strange light that thousands of people who have shared this experience all seem to encounter? And is there an angelic presence to guide them? Is it always a pleasant experience? Or are there those who experience the fear of damnation?
Some people claim we invented heaven because we want it to be real. On the contrary, as C.S. Lewis pointed out, what we want to be real is often a real evidence of what reality itself is. If you desire water, there's at least got to be such a thing as water, or there'd be no desire for water. Similarly, the desire for heaven could actually provide evidence that there is something there that satisfies the desire.
Some people believe that near-death experiences offer proof of an afterlife. Others believe that near-death experiences are merely a physiological reaction to the trauma of death. Is there any proof that would support one theory over the other? According to a Gallup poll, as many as 12 million people in the United States alone claim to have had a near-death experience. Countless books and articles have been written about the phenomenon. The stories seem too incredible to be true, and yet many hold to them as proof that death is not the end, that in fact it may be a new beginning. The story of Daniel Brinkley's near-death experience is a case in point, and it is so fantastic that it's best told by the man himself.
There was a sound of chimes as this tunnel moved and surrounded me. And then all of a sudden, there was no crying Sandy. There was no paramedics working on me. There was only me and that beautiful tunnel. I looked ahead into the darkness. There was a light up there and I began to move toward it as quickly as possible. I was moving without legs at a high rate of speed. Ahead the light became brighter and brighter until it overtook the darkness and it left me standing in a paradise of brilliant light. It was the brightest light I'd ever seen, but it was also soothing to my eyes. I looked to my right and I could see a silver form appearing like a silhouette through a mist. As it approached, I began to feel a deep sense of love that encompassed all of the meanings of the word. As the being of light came closer, the feelings of love intensified until the feelings became almost too pleasurable to withstand. I had a sense of becoming less dense. The burden of my body had been left behind. I looked at my hand and my chest. They were translucent and shimmering as they moved with a fluidity like water in the oceans or like the flow of silk in a light breeze. The being of light stood directly in front of me. As I gazed into its essence, I could see prisms of color as though it were composed of thousands of tiny diamonds, each emitting a color of the rainbow. This being engulfed me, and as it did, I began to experience my whole life, feeling and seeing everything that had ever happened to me. I believe the divine purpose of the near-death experience shows us that spirituality and medicine can combine, and now science is a part of spirituality, and spirituality is a part of science. And as we begin to resuscitate and look at this, we find a divine pattern in our lives and who we are, and what the meanings of our life is.
The profound intensity of the near-death experience is evident not only in the description of the actual event, but in the effect it has on the person who lives through it. Dr. Michael Sabom is a respected cardiologist whose scientific studies of near-death experiences are opening the door to this mysterious world.
Many of these people, after they've had a near-death experience, become totally different and new people. They develop new lifestyles, new interests, and new religious beliefs many times. So it can certainly be a life-changing event.
By his own admission, Dannion Brinkley had been a self-centered, angry person prior to his near-death experience. Afterward, he felt he had been given a second chance and a message of love to share with the world. Was this change of heart the inevitable result of a supernatural revelation? Or is there a simple medical explanation for what happened?
We know that drugs, not only hallucinogenic drugs like LSD, but even drugs used for surgical anesthesia, can precipitate so-called near-death experiences even when the person is nowhere near death.
There's no reason to think that near-death experiences are invalid because of the use of drugs, because there are many near-death experiences that occur without any drugs being used at all, as for example in accidents. So you can't explain something away by saying it's due to drugs when there are many cases that don't involve drugs at all.
Another common explanation for near-death experiences is that they result from a lack of oxygen to the brain, a condition known as hypoxia.
Some researchers have tried to find out, using computer models, what a typical visual imagery should be for someone undergoing oxygen deprivation to the brain. And what they have found is that the most likely scenario is a dark vision with a small white light in the center, gradually increasing in size to the point where ultimately the person would feel bathed totally in brilliant white light.
Is the phenomenon of the near-death experience simply an hallucination caused by drug side effects, or perhaps a lack of oxygen to the brain? Skeptics say without a doubt that this is the case, but are they considering all the evidence? In addition to a bright, soothing light, many people who have had a near-death experience report that they also felt removed from their own body. This enabled them to observe details about things going on around them, even though they were supposedly dead. Is the out-of-body experience also part of an elaborate hallucination, as critics contend? Experts who have studied the phenomenon believe that explanation falls short.
One theory that explains the out-of-body experiences that people have during the near-death experience is that they're having hallucinations, or maybe they're in a dreamlike state. However, there are some aspects of near-death experiences which this theory does not explain very well. One is the striking sense of reality and spiritual meaning that lasts for months or years, unlike most dreams or hallucinations. Another is the ability to see events that the experiencer should not have been able to see when they were unconscious.
My first study in the early 1980s incorporated 116 patients. It looked at the near-death experience from a medical and scientific standpoint, and my finding, bottom line, was that the out-of-body experience appeared to be a real experience in which accurate details were being observed and later could be proven once investigated and compared to actual medical records. Hallucination from oxygen deprivation is perception of unreality. In both of my studies, what I've been able to show is people during an out-of-body experience, during the time they're physically unconscious, are perceiving reality. So if it's reality they're perceiving, things can be documented with medical records or other sources of information, then this is not a hallucination and it's not from oxygen deprivation.
One of the most compelling examples of an out-of-body near-death experience is the case of Pam Reynolds. At age 35, Reynolds was diagnosed with a life-threatening brain aneurysm. Her only hope was a very unusual operation. In order to save her life, doctors would have to drain the blood out of Pam Reynolds' head. What's more, her body temperature would be lowered to 60 degrees, her heartbeat and breathing would stop completely, and her brain waves would be flattened. Doctors who performed this intense procedure have nicknamed it standstill, because for all intents and purposes, Pam Reynolds would be dead. But was she?
The process of death, scientifically, now is known to be a process and not a point in time. It starts with normal waking reality and ends up in irreversible death. During this process, the body dies at different rates. The problem we have as scientists and physicians is to determine when the brain is actually dead, i.e. when the person is actually dead.
In the case of Pam Reynolds, one of the surgeon's main concerns was seizure activity, which could prove deadly during such a delicate procedure. To guard against this and other complications, Pam's brain and body were extensively instrumented and monitored, which makes what happened next even more intriguing.
Pam Reynolds had a very deep near-death experience at the time that she had documented no brainwave activity, no brainstem activity. So this eliminates the possibility that this was a seizure phenomenon, because during her experience she had no seizure activity on the EEG. In addition, she had plugs in both of her ears, so she could not have physically heard what was being discussed in the operating room, and she could recall the accurate discussions that were going on at the time that she was having her experience.
Okay, I'm going in. Make it quick.
But perhaps the most compelling piece of evidence in the Reynolds case is the detail with which Pam was able to describe a particular surgical tool. During her out-of-body experience, Pam saw a tool which she would later say looked like an electric toothbrush with a dent in it. She also noticed that the tool had interchangeable blades. These were kept in something that looked like a socket wrench case. How could Pam Reynolds have described with such amazing accuracy the details of what took place in the operating room when she was supposedly dead?